So the different pieces of a bottoms-up financial projection, you're going to start with revenue. What are your revenue assumptions? How quickly do you think you're going to have revenue? What are the key revenue drivers? What does that revenue look like? How quickly can you scale the market? Then you're going to look at your spending. What's the spending that's necessary for achieving your milestones? Headcount, professional services, contractors, any other types of infrastructure that you're going to need to purchase or to hire. And then just what are the different projects that you're going to be able to accomplish with that overall spending and with that overall revenue. Typically, when you're doing a financial forecast for a venture deck, if you're presenting to VCs and you're putting a financial forecast in your pitch deck, typically what they're looking for is in year one, they're looking for a quarterly breakdown, and then they're looking for years 2 and years 3 on an annual basis. They're looking for it at a high level, so there's 2 ways you can approach it. You can either approach it by departments, so you have spending for G&A, spending for marketing, spending for engineering, or you can actually approach it from spending by drivers. Personnel costs, contract workers costs, professional services costs, infrastructure costs. But they want something very high level. They want a P&L on an accrual basis, so a full profit and loss statement using GAAP accounting. And then also your cash burn during that same period of time, what actual money is going to go out. And they also typically want to see what your head count is broken out on the model. So those are the components that they're looking for. Keep it very high level. I wouldn't go beyond 3 years. First year, quarterly detail, and then annual after that. Spending, the different pieces that are going into it. The customer cost details, what does it cost for customer acquisition? What are you spending to bring in new folks? Your human resource costs, so thinking about your payroll costs, also thinking about what are benefits going to cost you, what are your other personnel costs. You have some decisions that you're going to have to make if you're just starting your company in terms of how much healthcare you want to cover, what type of benefits you want to provide to your early stage employees, how you're going to set up your HR services and what those costs are that are associated with that. Consultants and professional services. I'm a big believer in, with early stage companies, outsourcing your non-key functions. So to the extent that you can, really using outsourced resources in the early days. So that doesn't just mean using outsourced finance and accounting and HR, but that means to the extent that you can actually outsource development, doing that, as many non-key functions as you can actually go out into the marketplace and hire. It gives you a lot more flexibility. It gives you a lot more options. It makes it very easy to turn and switch if things don't go well and you decide to go in a new direction. And it allows you to be a lot more nimble in terms of how you approach the market. And it also can keep your costs down. What are your research and development costs? Obviously, if you're an early stage company, this is going to be your biggest line item. This is going to be where most of your costs are. If you're in this area and you're hiring engineers, you're in a special trouble. Just because, as we all know, it's incredibly difficult to hire in this marketplace right now for engineers. Another reason to think about going outside of this area and what you can do in terms of adjusting for that. Office and administration. This is just thinking about things like what's your rent going to be, depending on where you're going to be. If you're going to be in San Francisco or down in the peninsula or in another area of the state, you can get a fairly good understanding of what rent's going to cost you and what that's going to look like. And the last is capital spending. Capital spending only really comes into play if you're a hardware company or if you're doing manufacturing. If you're a software company, an e-commerce company, a mobility company, most of your capital spending is just going to be your computers. Maybe you'll do your own server farm. Maybe you will build up your own network infrastructure, But for the most part, your capital spending is going to be incredibly light. Now, 4.5 years ago, when we were working with a lot of clean tech companies, that wasn't the case. And a lot of spend was going into capital, and that's where we were seeing a lot of our budgeting dollars were going, and a lot of the VC money was going right into capital. Today, with what's being funded, that's not necessarily the case.